So, economic D-Day +1.
Yeah, the Secretary of the Treasury yesterday announced economic D-Day, like economic war against Iran. It was, I think, more nothing than something.
It's over, right? That's it. It's done.
I mean, like, what the hell happened? What was that? I'm just going to go there. What happened?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things that we now have pretty good clarity on where it comes to the Iran conflict, at least from the U.S. perspective. So from big picture terms, we were kind of wondering what the U.S., I hate to use the term red lines, but what were the U.S., we have to do this or we're not going to stop. And so the three things I think have come up are, number one, the nuclear program, which, we knew that from the very beginning. The second thing was regime collapse. I think that has absolutely been the goal from the very beginning, though there were...
Yes, that was Trump's goal. That's what he was expecting in the first 3 days. And all the shit that happened since then, it is because he was wrong about what would happen in the first 3 days, and there was no plan for afterwards.
Reluctant to say so. And now I think it's absolutely clear that was the case.
The reason Trump has stopped talking about regime change is it's become increasingly obvious that regime change isn't going to be happening
all along. They tried to do the, like decapitation strike at the initial stage and see if that would work. But I think the goal has been from the very beginning, regime collapse, not regime change. Regime collapse. We get rid of the old guys and we put new guys in here who have nothing to do with the old guys, and we move on. And the third thing is that may or may not follow from the second one is control of the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. appears unwilling to give in on that. Whatever happens from here on out,
because optically it makes Trump look really, really bad, and the United States look really, really bad, with huge geopolitical fallout.
Three things are non-negotiable. I think we're very clear, and I think that's it's been established from the U.S. side as well as just, events, that those are the three goals that the U.S. has to have met or they're not going to stop, which leads to this game of chicken that we talked about. What was that last week, Brandon?
Yeah.
Where the Iranians are thinking, okay, that's what you're going for. What we're going to go for is to try to make the economy so bad and oil prices so expensive that you guys are forced to give up on your goals before, because for us, as far as...
They're actually doing a pretty good job of that. Here's diesel prices. It's just about to break out and start hitting all new all-time highs. Oil is not keeping up. Normally, diesel and oil should be trading at about the same, but diesel now is trading at a huge premium to oil. By the way, blatant market manipulation in oil continues. Besant might not know why oil prices are rising, but he sure as hell knows why they're falling. Oil just suffered 2 back-to-back well-coordinated short attacks during illiquid trading hours, combined with the release of bearish news. We are trapped in an endless loop of oil price suppression. Hormuz is basically open. Trump begging for a deal. Those are the headlines in the news as this short attack is happening. Blatant market manipulation.
The IRGC in particular is concerned. This is a fight for survival. There is no going back for them. If the U.S. gets if the U.S. especially gets the second of its demands, then it's not going to be good for the IRGC and hardliners. So the strategy the U.S. is pursued is also coming into full focus, which is to apply pressure so that it breaks the Iranian regime down. Which I think, by the way, they've had some success in actually accomplishing. So the idea is to get the moderates separated from the hardliners, and the moderates maybe take over from the hardliners. And I think Trump said this the other day where, we don't even know who the hell we're talking to. We talk to some reasonable people over here, then they fire missiles over there.
The Iranians aren't talking to anyone on the U.S. side.
But I think the idea here is to just continue to slowly ratchet up the pressure, hoping that eventually the Iranian side cracks under the, first of all, military pressure and the threat of more military, because the U.S. hasn't removed any of its military assets, or at least, scaled down the capabilities in any significant way. So they still have the military threat, but now they're applying the economic pressure because that seems to be working as well. Working in the respect that it is breaking down the Iranian economy, making things increasingly difficult over in Iran, and hoping that the population, or at least enough of the population, sees the Iranian hardliners as the stumbling block to get.
One thing about Jeff Snyder is he isn't a geopolitics guy. He hasn't been covering the war from that angle. So his position is different from the experts in that field that we usually watch. I take what he's saying here with a grain of salt.
To some kind of future that at the very least brings the Iranians to the table under the U.S. terms, or something like a civil war happens, or some kind of conflict where the Iranian side becomes a race, and the regime collapse takes place. So I think from the U.S. perspective, we now have pretty good clarity. That's what they're after, and they're willing to continue this conflict as long as it takes to achieve it.
Yeah, I agree with you that's sort of where we are. Of course, regime collapse. I just had Alan Iyer on about 2 hours ago, and he was one of the lead negotiators for JCPOA, fluent Farsi speaker, and he was saying that had we never invaded, or not invaded, but had we never started the war, the regime was likely on its way to collapse on its own. And now
I've been hearing that repeatedly, and it's very possible.
We've sort of strengthened it. Obviously, economically, it is struggling, and he said as much.
Though, to be fair, if we had invaded, one reason it was teetering on the edge is because it's been under economic attack. The U.S. Secretary of Treasury admitted that he shorted the Iranian rial and crashed the Iranian currency to cause the protests. So there is a lot of outside pressure on Iran, even without the military action.
Do you think, though, and this is what I asked him, do you think that what we're doing economically will have the desired impact anytime soon?
Anytime soon, no.
Good. He's rational. Yes, not anytime soon.
Yeah. So if you put it in the short run timetable,
by the way.
No way. It's not an anytime soon kind of a deal. And I've said that from the very beginning. When they were talking about this is going to be 3 weeks, and I kind of chuckled. Look, no matter what you think about this is not going to be a 3 week. This is a complex operation with a whole ton of variables and unknowns. These types of operations anyway are inherently unpredictable. So there's no way this is going to be done in the short run to begin with. And even now, where I think the U.S. has made significant progress toward its goal, I mean, they're still, they're still in their own side of the field here. They're not anywhere close to the goal line, but at least making progress. There's still a long way to go, and there's still a lot of uncertainties along the way. But I do think there is a plausible pathway, which is one reason why they still stay in the game and are continuing the conflict. And I do think that just putting yourselves in the shoes of the Trump administration from the strategies they're trying to pursue, it is a much better and wiser course to pursue the economic pressure.
Especially like 3 months before the midterms.
Pressure than it would be to continue to pursue the military pressure. The military side of it was fraught with risks to begin with, and I don't think it helps them achieve their goals anymore. So the economic pressure is the only way that they're going to be able to succeed here is to make the situation over in Iran.
But in the economic game of who has more leverage, Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. So the U.S. is in a losing proposition on the economic front, too.
So bad that the population doesn't blame Trump, blames the hardliners in the IRGC and rises up against them. I think that's the only real plausible way for the U.S. to achieve its goals here. And the question is, can they...
Let me just show you this. U.S. says oil is pouring through Hormuz. Trackers can't find it. In other words, it's lies to keep the price of oil down.
Do it. That's still, obviously it's an open question. Can that actually happen? It was a low probability to begin with. Again, I think they've made progress in actually getting there, because we've seen a number of reports come out of Iran of how much quality you want to assign to them, where the Iranians are in desperate shape. The Iranian military is having difficulty paying its soldiers, which is not really a surprise. There's been any number of reports about executions. And
I remember reading for years about how the Russian economy was on the verge of collapse. Never collapsed. It's been growing pretty steadily all these years. Might be different with Iran, but I think that the reports we read about chaos in Iran are probably exaggerated.
Public public displays of authority, which are actually signs of instability. So it's still, I mean, that doesn't mean that the Iranian regime is necessarily going to fall, but it does mean that the pressure is there and it is actually having a substantial effect. But a lot of things really do have to go exactly right in order to get all the way to the goal line here.
That's right. I don't think they're going to go right. And this was what Alan Iyer, and now obviously he made it very clear he's not an economist. He's not, he said he's an English major, but he's, he was one of the lead negotiators. He speaks Farsi. He knows a lot of the players in the government of Iran, and he was of the mind, and he's not the only one, that it's not going to work anytime soon. And really, the Trump administration, they need some short-term gains, and they're not getting it. The Strait of Hormuz remains. Oh, sorry, my Siri's going off. It's interesting how Siri listens in on.
Yeah, Siri had something to say there. You probably should let her talk.
You mean the NSA had something to say? No, but
or the Chinese,
or the Chinese at this point, right? So I'm forgetting what I was going to say now.
The Strait of Hormuz, right?
Yes,
I mean,
the Strait of Hormuz. Yes.
Yeah.
So it remains closed. And there's another ship apparently burning in the mouth of the strait as of 24 hours ago. It's become a regular event, almost not newsworthy. The Omanis, though, claimed in the last 24 hours, and I think if I remember correctly, the Iranian news service confirmed that they had a tentative deal with Iran. Are we seeing any positive momentum toward reopening the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, there's so many lies coming out of Trump administration. Like, all mines have been removed from the Strait of Hormuz is one of their latest lies. And I haven't heard about any mine clearing operations. And that would sort of be necessary to demine the Strait of Hormuz. So, just lies and lies.
Well, there were reports, and again, I don't know the veracity of these reports. I guess they can be verified, but there were reports that ship traffic through Hormuz was picking up. The number they threw around was there a 400% increase in ship traffic through Hormuz, which, I mean, 400% from a low level is probably
like 3. That's
so from 3 to 12, but that, I mean, that could be taken as a sign of progress, though. I mean, you don't know how it. I mean,
you really have to be an optimist for that.
Yes. I mean, there are these small signs of progress like that. The U.S. just announced that they had cleared all the mines through Hormuz. No way to verify that. If you take it at face value, that could be a sign. There could be a pickup in ship traffic over the next couple of days if people buy into that idea that there's less risk. But as you point out, Brandon, all it takes is somebody in the IRGC to fire a couple of missiles, and next thing you know, it closes all over again. Yeah. So to permanently open the Strait of Hormuz and not just get some kind of, short-run buzz.
There's another one on that. Strait of Hormuz traffic explodes 400%. They will say anything to pump the stock market. Yeah, that is the reality.
Or talking point for the media to try to portray some kind of substantial progress. To actually have substantial progress is it's difficult, if not I don't want to say it's impossible, because it's not really impossible, but it's increasingly difficult to show progress other than just to say there are these reports doing this and there's these reports doing that. And that's not necessarily an unexpected turn of events. This is still a conflict. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty and unknowns on both sides. So we don't really know what's taking place on the ground. We don't know, the real capabilities of the Iranian side. We don't really know what the U.S. is up to, other than what we can get told from these various reports. So a lot of this is still guesswork, but the guesswork is not adding up to this thing is going to be over in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. And that's been the story from the beginning, right? It was always supposed to be a short-term war, and it's been, it was 96 hours, then it was 3 weeks, then it was 5 weeks. Now it's, 6 months going on 7 months. Who knows? What is the more vital from the U.S. strategic and economic interest? Is it to hold fast to this notion that Strait of Hormuz belongs to no one and must be restored to pre-war operations?
That won't happen. When Trump bombed the Supreme Leader, he gave Iran the Strait of Hormuz, the excuse to close it, and Iran will never let that go. It will, because it's its leverage, it's its power, it's its guarantee to not be attacked again. Hold it closed until Trump squeals, and at that point, no U.S. president will ever want to strike Iran again. At least not while oil is a key commodity.
Or is it going to have to come down to Trump accepting some form of Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz?
That's a question I don't know if we can answer, because we don't really know how far Trump would be willing to go.
Before the midterms, I don't think he's willing to go there, unless he's forced to by some catastrophe, economically speaking, which I think is still likely to happen. But apart from that, yeah, I think he's hoping to delay this to after the midterms, and then if he needs to do something politically unpopular, he can do it then.
I don't think Trump knows.
No, I think that it's one of those things that the U.S. would be willing to escalate. If it gets to the point where they can't force the Strait of Hormuz open and the Iranians are going to exercise some level of control, I don't think it's necessarily just economic D-Day at that point. I think they continue to ratchet up the pressure in economic terms, but also turn more toward the military solution too. I do believe that the Trump administration is willing to take it that far over those three things that we mentioned.
Yeah.
Where it comes to the nuclear program, the regime collapse, as well as the Strait of Hormuz, I think they are willing to escalate and continue to escalate as long as they...
I agree with that analysis. I'll just add that there's another dynamic to that he's not mentioning, in that an actual oil shortage that completely disrupts U.S. economy. Trump, those priorities disappear. He caves to Iran right away then. The only reason he's not is that the stock market hasn't yet crashed and oil is still relatively low.
I think it's necessary, and there's some kind of plausible way to achieve those goals. So even though, they talk right now about, hey, we're going to apply pressure slowly through the economic channel, if it gets to the point where they don't think they're making enough progress, I do think that Trump will ratchet things up that much farther. The question you're asking, I think, is there a point at which Trump says, I've had enough, I can't get to where I need to go, and I have to walk away?
Yeah.
I don't know necessarily what that looks like.
Yeah. I don't
Is this a year later and we're still talking about the Strait of Hormuz, and then, after the midterms go?
No, oil reserves have run out long before another year from now, so that's not an issue.
Completely foul, and there's all sorts of congressional investigations and pressure from the rest of the international community. Hey, it's been a year, you guys haven't achieved your goals, it's time to give up. I don't necessarily think that we can answer those questions. We don't know what will make Trump decide we've tried our best and it's just not going to work. There's no way to get to where we want it to go, so we have to walk away from this no matter how bad that makes us look. So I don't think we can I don't think we have any way to answer that.
See, that's Trump's fundamental problem. Walking away is surrender. Because what Iran wants, it wants U.S. out of the Gulf base states. It wants them out of the Gulf states, out of the bases there. In other words, it wants U.S. to walk away. It also wants U.S. to recognize its control over the Strait of Hormuz, which it de facto has. So if the United States stops challenging that control, that's the same as giving it to Iran. So if Trump walks away, everyone will see that as Trump having lost. That's why Trump can't walk away. That's why he's trapped.
That question you said, other than to say, I believe that the U.S. is willing to escalate as far as it needs to go, at least in the short and intermediate terms.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Or at the very least, they're willing to just kind of sit in a frozen conflict rather than cede the point to Iran. And right now, Iran, this is another thing I talked to Alan about, and he said, because, Mario and I kind of had a debate about this yesterday. I said that Iran will not go down 1 penny on their demands for the fee in the Strait of Hormuz under current economic pressure, because that will be seen as a...
Unfortunately, time is on Iran's side. U.S. crude inventories at 40, 50-year lows. And it's not getting better.
They're giving up, and they have to be seen as resisting. Mario said, no, there might be a deal. And I said, no, that's... Well, Alan also said that, in his experience, the resistance is like the ideological sort of rallying call. They're not going to ever negotiate under current conditions a reduction in the tolls that might make it more palatable for Trump. Do you think that's right, or where do you think that Trump might be willing to negotiate on the fee issue, maybe come around, or is this just a frozen thing until, whenever?
It's something breaks here. Yeah, the idea
If something breaks in the global economy, then yes.
that
Correct.
Trump was willing to negotiate, what was that, a month or so ago, a month and a half ago? I don't think he was ever willing to negotiate. I think that was specifically meant to try to get oil prices back down.
Yeah.
By
Yes,
Trump
agreed.
softening his
Absolutely
rhetoric,
agreed.
it was like, hey, this is another 2 weeks till the end here. Because that's been the strategy all along where it comes to the oil market. Every time oil prices start to get up, he dangles the end of the conflict in front of the marketplace, and immediately the speculators capitulate. Shorts go into the marketplace, oil prices go down, and then we find out he wasn't really willing to negotiate.
Right.
So,
Go ahead,
Brandon.
No, go ahead, please, Jeff. I'm
What I
sorry.
was going to say is that, I think from the Trump administration's perspective, set aside all of this public theater, I really think they are unwilling to compromise on those three positions.
Yeah.
So no matter what you hear or see over the next little while, those three positions remain hard. So you have hardliners over in Iran. I think you're right about that too. The hardliners in Iran can't give an inch, or they can't give another inch or another foot, because they've already, let's be honest here. The Iranians have taken it pretty hard. They killed the Ayatollah, which is a really big deal here. And the Iranians really haven't done much about it. So the hardliners over in Iran, they really can't give up here. So you've got the Iranian hardliners who are saying we cannot give in an inch. You've got the Trump.
I might not be an Iranian hardliner, but it's what I've been saying for months. If Iran gives Trump an out to this, in 6 months, Trump bombs them again. They're just endless war for Iran. They need to establish deterrence. They need to inflict pain, a loss on Trump. That's what I would do if I was Iran, because that's the only way to prevent another attack, establish real deterrence. And they're on the verge of establishing that. I said all they need to do is hold the Strait of Hormuz closed 6 months. I figured they still have another month before they're at that objective, because the MOU did allow some oil out. But they're pretty damn close to it.
Administration says we can't give in an inch, and we're locked into the struggle until something actually breaks. And that break from the U.S. perspective is the moderates or some other regime in the Iranian government takes control from the IRGC through one way or another, whether it be a popular uprising, some kind of coup,
Very unlikely to happen, by the way.
some kind of civil war.
You know this because by the fact that Trump isn't talking about regime change anymore, and that he doesn't really expect it to happen.
Or something that breaks on the Iranian side. From the U.S. side, again, like I said, I don't know what breaks the Trump administration's resolve. I
Market crash, oil skyrocketing.
I have no idea what that is, because I think they're willing to go the extra couple miles to keep this up.
Well, and related to breaking,
Well, Trump, you can think Trump might be willing, but are Republicans in Congress willing to lose the midterms? Because if oil starts really spiking, the stock market starts tanking, there's going to be some cries to Trump to end this. And if oil goes up, nations around the world like Japan are going to be putting pressure on Trump. He's going to, let's say, the pressure on Trump. Right now, the neocon side, the war side, is a lot stronger, but oil prices spike, that'll change.
the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, we're told, the SPR, is about 40 days away from, I don't want to say being at zero, but basically being at a very, very, very historic low. And, I talked to Gary Vogler, who's an oil expert. We've heard from Chris Martinson. Mario's talked to Chris. I have not talked to Chris, but I'm aware of what he's saying. Basically, we're already in a dangerous spot. If it gets any lower, the physical, structural integrity of these salt mines might actually be
An issue.
at risk. Do you think that this is a crisis in how significant?
The reason for this is we built our petroleum reserves in salt mines. We hollowed out tunnels so basically the whole entire structure is supported by salt. And the way they get the oil out is by pumping water down, so that makes the oil that's lighter than water float up and we collect the oil. Well, as we drain more and more of our strategic petroleum reserve, there's more and more water in those caverns, slowly dissolving the salt, weakening the structure, and it could collapse.
Is what's going on with the SPR to what we're talking about in terms of this sort of breaking point?
Well, I don't know anything about the structure of the salt mines.
No, I know that, but I'm just
So I'm not going to comment. I'm not going to offer a comment on that. Which, I mean, that's probably a real thing because you've got these things filled. So that's probably a real danger. I think the good news here is that whatever the focus on the SPR is not misplaced. I'm not saying that's the case because it is an important asset here, but private inventories haven't really been dented all that much. And so there's an additional margin out there in private inventories in the US as well as in other pockets around the rest of the world that extend the runway a bit further as far as, absorbing the the continued supply hit through Hormuz. It's not like if we run out of the SPR in 40 days, we're out of oil. Because there's still a lot of production that's taking place, and there's still a lot of private inventories. So it's not one of those factors that's going to break the Trump administration in a month's time. At least let's put it that way.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's certainly a different opinion than what I've been hearing. So I'm glad I can get that.
But I'm not sure he's an expert on the oil situation. I think he knows a lot about finance and economics, but I've watched some commentators that are experts on actual oil, and I think we're much closer to a danger point than he admits.
I was hoping that you would give me a different opinion because all the inputs that I've heard has been, this is the end, it's crisis, it's going to, sort of the black.
That's the thing, though. But Brandon, we've been hearing that ever since the beginning. So
yes, no, but not from me. Not from me. I was like, they'll keep the price of oil down at 100 for at least 2 months was my position, longer if they can, and they've been able to keep it down a long time. But that isn't endless. It has to end at some point.
Guilty of propagating that because I still am worried about it, but
you should be. That's the thing. Yeah. That's these positions are coming from they're coming from rational analysis. Right. So you look at the situation. It's not like you're just throwing out crap against the wall, see what sticks.
Right.
But there's a couple of things that are in our favor. One of them we've talked about before is China. The Chinese are not buying the way that they had before for a couple of different reasons. Sinopec just recently said, peak oil usage in China was last year. Some of that is the EV adoption, which I think you and I talked about the last time I visited. That has reduced the amount of Chinese demand for oil, which has taken a tremendous amount of pressure off the oil market over the last year or so. I also think, and I'm pretty sure, the Chinese economy has taken a large step backwards outside of just EV adoption, where we're seeing fixed asset investment and productive investment in outside the.
The thing is, China reduced its demand for oil by forbidding exports of, for example, diesel. And that's why you have diesel prices skyrocketing, because China was one of the big suppliers of diesel. And Russia, too, is offline because of Ukrainian attacks. But in September, they're apparently going to lift those restrictions. So they're going to start importing oil like crazy because the crack spread. Right now, if you're a refiner, you can buy oil at this and then sell it at this price. Huge profit. Right now, Chinese refiners can't take advantage of this because they're not allowed to export diesel. But that's why the demand from China went down. It's because there's no market for it because they can't sell their diesel internationally. Once the restrictions are lifted, expect oil to suit up and and catch up to where diesel is.
Property sector contract, where contraction in manufacturing investments, building new factories, that type of thing, that's going to take a tremendous amount of energy demand off the table as well, and that's accelerating to the downside. So I don't say the Chinese are doing us a favor; they're inadvertently helping us along there by extending the life of the existing supplies. So you've got the Chinese as well as private inventories and production. Venezuela at the margins can help out a little bit. It's not a huge thing. The UAE has really stepped up production, at least as far as what we've seen from published reports. Don't know really any way to verify that, but the UAE their production has gone through the roof. So there are some marginal barrels on the production side. There are some private inventories out there, and there is, demand destruction taking place. Not that we want demand destruction,
Right.
but demand destruction taking place that reduces the urgency a bit, so that it's not an.
Here's a tweet that explains what I was saying. In theory, the reason diesel is in short supply globally is because facilities that are available to refine crude oil into preferred fuel for trucks, buses, and trains are already running at full tilt. Many Russian refineries, formerly outsized producers of diesel, have been taken offline owing to the attacks by Ukraine. China, though, has ample spare capacity. Even before the U.S. began its war with Iran, China had more refineries than it needed to supply its own domestic needs of oil-derived products. Its cuts to crude imports and product exports have left many plants half idle. That's why you're seeing this crack spread in diesel, is because China stopped buying oil, but they also stopped selling diesel, which is what they produced from the oil. In aggregate, 13 million barrels a day they are producing is... thanks for the follow, Kurilas. They're producing 2.3 barrels fewer than last February. So I think once the export restrictions on diesel are lifted, Chinese refineries start buying lots of oil, because as long as the price of oil is less than the price of diesel, as long as it's not like this, it makes sense for refineries to just buy more and more oil and refine it into diesel. And all these idle refineries in China, once they start cracking that up, it will push oil prices up, and it will bring diesel down a little bit. They'll be back in line with each other.
Imminent threat that that causes this thing to completely fall apart, and therefore we get a resolution to the conflict one way or the other, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is sort of where I'm now starting to think there's maybe not as I don't want to say significant, but maybe not as pressing of a concern. I will admit, up until about 3 or 4 days ago, I was very worried about it, but I've been talking to a lot of different people, and
I think the bigger concern as far as the energy market goes is diesel fuel and distillates.
Well, that was actually going to be my next. Yeah, go ahead. You've taken the question out of my mouth.
Well, we're thinking alike here. So the diesel fuel, I mean, look, there's a growing shortage or potential shortage in distillates for obvious. I mean, when you cut off petroleum supply, there's not enough feedstock going into refineries. They can't run the refineries at the same rates that they would otherwise normally do so. So inventories of those distillate fuels have been winding down. Crack spreads have gone through the roof, especially for diesel, which is the market's way of trying to pull some more diesel supply into the marketplace. But I will say that, as realistic as a possible shortfall in diesel and a physical shortfall in diesel and gasoline might be, there is still some margin for error there. The marketplace itself is not overly concerned about it. It's a concern.
I am going to disagree here, because you have to look at the context of the entire media complex telling people that there's an oil glut, that diesel prices will fall, that they're getting all this oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. And so you have a lot of buyers of diesel that are waiting on the sidelines, waiting for the price of diesel to fall. And they've waited, and we're now reaching a point where they can't wait any longer and just going to have to buy at current prices. And so there's a lot of pent-up demand for diesel. That if prices start moving higher, it could create panic buying.
And it's a real concern. We could be running into shortages. We could be running into a 1970s-style gas lines at certain places around the world. That is a possibility, but the market is not pricing it as a high.
Yeah, because the market is manipulated. You can't look at the market and say, and try to predict what's going to happen based on that, because market isn't rational. It's being controlled right now.
Probability. Right now, the market is relatively, again, I just went through this, I did a Q&A for our members, and I don't want to use the term sanguine because sanguine's the wrong word. The market is at least not as fearful that something like that's going to erupt in the short run. It's a possibility that needs to be considered, but it isn't necessarily the base case that we need to be worried about. It is a problem that is going to continue to fester and get bigger so long as the Strait of Hormuz and production continues to be constrained. However,
I think what we can expect to happen is to have the current situation, this limbo, continue right up into the point where you start actually having shortages. And then it's going to be panic. So you're going to not have a smooth rise in oil prices, for example. You can expect like it to jump right up to like 150 once the panic starts, rather than go up to 120, 130. It's going to be a big jump. But up to that point, it's going to be about where it is now, around 100, right up until that panic.
There is still some margin in the system to be able to continue to kind of just muddle our way through for the next short run little while here.
So you're not concerned at all that the market might be missing some signals that, because I mean it is bizarre to me that I see diesel fuel prices just driving down the road. I see it on the, it's gone up, and that affects everything.
Like, for example, U.S. refineries are running at 97% capacity, full stop, with no stops for maintenance. Now, if you continue doing that without any maintenance, at some point something is going to break down. And they've been running at this way for months in terms of refining every day, all the time, no downtime. If he's not factoring in that you could have a refinery malfunction and it takes some U.S. refinery offline, and then suddenly you have a disaster. Because diesel prices would not be all the way up here if there was an extreme tightness in the market.
Everything runs off of diesel, really, that matters. So you're not worried that maybe market signals are getting it wrong, or maybe they're missing certain things?
Always worried about that, because markets are far from perfect.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean, the markets give us a sense. They give us
That's an understatement.
one data point. It's a pretty big data point.
Though I will say that markets are better when they're not actively being manipulated by, say, Treasury and the Fed, which is what's happening in this case in a lot of markets, treasuries, oil, etc. But even when they're not manipulated from the top, bubbles always happen. Internet bubble, yes, might have been fueled by some corrupt people on top, but bubbles have always happened long before that. It's human nature. Markets are not completely rational.
Point that you should depend upon, but it's not a perfect data point. So there is absolutely a possibility where the markets are underpricing that type of risk, and so you always got to look for confirmation. So the markets are saying one thing. Can we confirm it or deny it or refute it in other types of either information, statistics, or whatever else? So some other marketplace.
Right.
But other markets kind of agree here that at least in the foreseeable future, as much as there is a foreseeable future given the tremendous uncertainty we're talking about, but the foreseeable future, it does seem relatively plausible and relatively a pretty good bet. But the markets are, they're pricing the world the way that they are because there does seem to be some margin for error here, at least in the near term. Where it goes to beyond that, that's a completely separate story. Just to give you an example, you look at the WTI futures curve, which is something you can just look at. Contracts and prices next year continue to be anchored in the low 70s, which is, take that one or two ways, and these are not mutually exclusive options. The market is either saying this Hormuz crisis is done by the middle of next year. We get supply normalization, the refiners are back operating at full capacity, or the market says we start becoming more like China where demand gets destroyed. Either way, the market...
No demand has been destroyed. The market's hitting all-time highs, it was as of a couple of weeks ago. There's been no talk about recession yet in the media, so no demand has been destroyed. Even in China, demand has not been destroyed. It's just not been refining diesel.
Really believes there's a very high probability oil prices are back down into not just the 70s. You don't take it literally. There's a chance that they're down in the 70s, maybe the 60s, maybe the 50s, where the fundamental value of oil is. So markets are saying that there's a very good chance whatever happens the rest of this year, next year, we're not talking about $150 oil. We're talking about $50 oil.
It's probably the demand destruction is my...
Yeah, I mean, that's the more likely outcome, but...
Boy, wouldn't it be great if it's the happier one, you know?
Yeah. But
Sorry.
value of oil is. So markets are not talking about.
Wouldn't it be great if it's the happier one, you know?
Yeah, but you and I, we don't. Yeah, I don't think there's a really good chance that's the case.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And speaking of China, the economic D-Day, I've been calling it DUD, D for Dud. Scott Bessent goes out, does his, big St. Crispin's Day speech, and then he sort of lets in on the fact that, well, we don't really have China on board. Then this morning I'm looking at, I think it was the spokesman for the foreign ministry in China, basically saying, yeah, we're not going to go along with the American,
We have no plans to do what you want us to do.
Right. So what exactly are we, okay, so given the increase in really power that China has here, what is the Trump administration's next move with China?
China, I get, the Chinese have their own set of problems. So the idea here is to allow them, they'll be distracted by their own internal struggles, that they don't necessarily have the capability to focus exclusively on Iran anyway. But I mean, any expectation that the U.S. and China were going to somehow cooperate over something like this that's zero chance that's ever going to happen. So the Chinese, they're going to do what the Chinese are going to do. They're going to take an adversarial position no matter what. And honestly, kind of thinking along the lines that you are, this whole economic D-Day thing is another one of it's just for public. It's public consumption. The U.S. has been applying economic pressure pretty steadily all along. The blockade has been a huge part of it. They can announce some additional measures that the Treasury Department will take about, choking off financing, which they don't really have the authority to do that either, right, given the nature of the Eurodollar system, which is not really responsive all that much to government pressure. The Biden administration found that out the hard way with the Russians when they tried to freeze them out, 4 years ago. Was that 4 years ago? Yeah.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
So I think this is really, you hit the nail on the head earlier, Brandon, when you said we don't have a whole lot of tangible progress to show. So what do you do in that situation? Well, if you're a politician, what you do is you create some theater that looks like you have some kind of success, or that you look like you have some kind of power and authority.
Yeah. Trump has been doing a lot of theater. We own the Strait of Hormuz.
And make a big show of it to at least give your own voters something to grab onto, to give undecided voters some kind of uncertainty that maybe this is going well, or maybe they do have the tools to finish the job. So the economic D-Day to me was nothing more than political theater.
Exactly. It was a whole bunch of nothing.
And the fact that the Chinese just basically said, hey, we don't care what you guys say, we're going to do our own thing anyway. Nobody should be surprised by that, because the Chinese were never going to give us a hand with that to begin with. So a lot of it comes down to, in the absence of good and useful information, everybody's just kind of throwing stuff into a vacuum. Both sides are doing it. People like you and me, we're doing the same thing. We're kind of throwing our opinions into the vacuum. But without any sort of clarity, it's none of this should be surprising. Everybody's kind of doing what people do in these situations.
Yeah. Yeah. And where is China going? What is their strategy? I mean, clearly Iran's a partner. They need these energy flows. They want to see the region of the Middle East stable for a variety of reasons. What is China's, so what do you think their game plan is right now for getting through this crisis? I mean, how long can they stay, for instance, not purchasing energy off of the global market?
Actually, I think that for China, that doesn't matter. Right now, yes, for us, diesel's up. For the rest of the world, anyone who imports diesel. But I bet you in China, diesel is down here. I was trying to look that up, but I couldn't find it. But yeah, the export restrictions, the crack spread in China, I think is still working like normal. It's just the export restrictions means that the rest of the world is now short of diesel. China has enough. It has enough oil. It has enough diesel. But if China lifts its restriction on its export of diesel, then the price of diesel in China would go way up to match this, and they probably don't want to do that. If that remains the case, we'll have to see. The rumor has it they're lifting restrictions into September. If that happens, price of oil will shoot up. If it doesn't happen, likely we're going to have a diesel shortage worldwide, everywhere except like China and Russia and places that, make it. But for the United States and the rest of the world, we could have a diesel shortage.
Market, and I mean, that can't be a long-term reliable strategy.
Maybe it is, because you look at what happened last year in China. I mean, you got to think that the Chinese intelligence.
And on that note, I don't think that the Chinese made a decision to reduce their demand for oil. I think it's the export restriction. When this crisis happened, they were worried about the price of diesel in China, so they put restrictions on the ability of refiners in China to export diesel. And if they, since a lot of the refiners that were buying oil prior to the war were doing it to refine diesel and sell it internationally, they could no longer do that, so they stopped buying oil. And that accounts for the drop in demand of China for oil. If the export ban on diesel is lifted, then Chinese demand would just come back full force, I think.
Intelligence knew what the Trump administration was up.
Because there's record profits to be made. I mean, I bet you the refiners in China are screaming at the government, please let us export diesel, because they can buy oil at this and then sell diesel at this. That's massive profits. And the only reason they can't do this is because the government's forbidding export of diesel. So they're probably not happy, the refiners in China.
Up to. Just because, Trump has been talking about Iran, nothing is ever really that secret. But more than that, would you look at what the Chinese were doing with oil imports and oil inventories last year, primarily after the June 2025, the nuclear, the 12-day war, right? The Chinese started buying tons of oil that they didn't need. They started filling up the reserves, and we have no idea how big the reserves are. They won't tell us. Nobody has any clue. Again, we're speculating, lack of information. But it was very clear the Chinese were buying oil that they didn't need. They knew that EV adoption was going to take some of the demand off. They knew the economy was weak, going to take demand. Why were they stockpiling tons of oil late in 2025 before anybody thought there was a possibility the Strait of Hormuz was being closed? So I think the Chinese were preparing for something like this, saying, look, we're going to stockpile a crap ton of oil in case the Trump administration attacks Iran, closes off our Hormuz. We're not stuck with, insufficient inventories. Yeah, we have lower levels of demand, but we also have huge stores throughout the country. There's strategic reserves, and therefore we're somewhat insulated from the consequences of something like that happening. I don't think that was completely an accident. In fact, that was one of the things that
I absolutely agree with this. Of course, 12-day war probably scared China, and so they built up the strategic petroleum reserves even more.
People point out and say, why are the Chinese buying so much oil? It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, especially considering how oil demand was going down last year to begin with. The Chinese economy was in bad shape. They were overbuying oil for what seemed to be a specific reason, and I think the two are linked together, which means that the Chinese, as far as the Strait of Hormuz issue goes, they're not necessarily immediately affected by it either. So they can kind of sit back and wait in the wings or wait in the shadows to see how this thing is likely to play out before they really reveal their entire hand. I think that's their strategy here, is they're somewhat insulated from the energy consequences to begin with.
And also, even during this whole Iran war, China's been importing a huge amount of oil from Iran. During the first month and a half, when the United States was lifted sanctions on Iranian oil, they just bought everything. Then during the MOU, again, they bought everything. So they have been importing oil despite the war. One place it's been importing oil from the Middle East in bulk.
Therefore, let's just see how it plays out. If the Trump administration and the U.S. looks like it's going to break Iran, we'll applaud them in public and say, you got rid of those mullahs. We didn't really like them to begin with. We just partnered up with them because we really didn't like, we really kind of...
I disagree. The China strategic interest, it cannot afford to have the U.S. United States control Iran, to be cut off from Persian oil in the Gulf. So I think if it really looked like Iran might fold, China might become involved militarily. It doesn't want to, but you can't let the United States control Iran.
I had to. And if it looks like the Iran's going to, get through the conflict and maintain some level of stability there, they can always say, well, look, we supported them the entire time. We're going to, we're glad that they beat those evil Americans. So I think the Chinese are sitting there thinking we can play both sides of this based on how it goes.
Interesting.
I disagree. I think they're more heavily invested in the Iranian side. They don't want to burn bridges with the United States. and officially acknowledge anything, but they know that one of the main reasons the United States attacked Iran was as to gain leverage over China. I mean, China controls rare earth. If Trump controlled Iran and Venezuela, that leaves China entirely dependent on Russian oil, which I don't know if Russia alone can meet Chinese demand for oil, but it's still a bad place to be because that can be disrupted and it makes them reliant on a single source. So, yeah, they don't want Iran to go under. China is not a neutral partner. It is much more on Iran's side.
I think, I think the wait and see strategy is the preferred strategy in Beijing right now. In fact, I just got an email from our friend Peter Alexander, who is a regular
Wait and see and act behind the scenes. They have definitely been supporting Iran behind the scenes.
guest on the show. He's a U.S. He's American, but he's been living in Shanghai for the last 30 years, does investments there, but he's on the road. He's on a road show right now, but he just emailed me as we were talking. One of his clients who's connected over there was talking about basically exactly what you're saying, is that basically China took note of the weaponization, another weaponization move by the U.S. with the economic war, the weaponization of our financial system, but they're basically going to wait and see. They're not. It's very interesting how that works. They're not. Yeah, go ahead.
It's just going to be it's the smart play here, right? Because again, if they had any idea which side was going to win, they would have joined either side to begin with. So they're really sitting back and thinking there's way too much uncertainty for us to really do anything. And honestly, while it wouldn't help if the U.S. is successful, the downside for the Chinese isn't necessarily catastrophic. If the Iranians end up losing and there is a regime change in Iran, I mean, who's to say the Chinese don't come into the new regime and say, hey, we're your best friends? I mean, they can play this any number of different ways. And so there was absolutely no reason for them to come in and say, we're going to choose one side or the other. Yeah. They have every strategic reason to placate Trump as much as possible, placate the Iranians as much as possible, maybe send them some shoulder-fired missiles here and there. And they did. Maybe share some satellite technology.
And just showing you, like I finally found something. Asian refining margins are wide. Chinese refiners can't fully capture it. A price ceiling and export ban see to that. So domestically, there's a price ceiling. So they can buy oil at this price, but they can only sell it at a certain price domestically. And exports are restricted. So the crack spread in China is actually, it's only 40, whereas in the rest of the world, it's nearly 100. It's like 80. It's much larger.
But not do something, not do too much overtly that people would say, oh, the Chinese and the Iranians. No, they're playing, they're sitting on the sidelines waiting to see who wins. And then they're going to swoop in and say, okay, we got a new regime in Iran. Hey, let's partner up. We're still open for business. If it's the old guys in Iran, they could say, hey, we're still open for business.
No. Chinese have been offering a huge amount of support to Iran behind the scenes. China cannot afford for the United States to control Iran. It is not, I disagree absolutely here, it is not a neutral party. It cares about the outcome of this war. Its preferred thing is some negotiated settlement that opens Strait of Hormuz. It does want that, but it does not want the Iranian regime to fold.
That's exactly what they did in Iraq, by the way, in 2000.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, why would you do anything else? I think that's the question we should ask.
Well, obviously, because the entire point of the United States targeting Iran, a big part of it was to go after China, is to cut off another of China's oil sources. They've already taken out Venezuela. They take out Iran too. That would give Trump a huge amount of leverage over China. China doesn't want Trump to have a huge amount of leverage over them. So what he's saying here about them being a neutral party in regard to Iran is just, I'm sorry, here it is pretty retarded.
Unfortunately, the American side is the one that seems to be lighting fires everywhere, and we don't look so good when we do this, though. But so the Chinese are in wait and see mode. The Iranians, they're clearly it's not a cakewalk for them. but they're still weathering the storm. I mean, it's not like it's a fait accompli that they're going to collapse.
Rather, there is no signs of it at all at the moment. They are ascendant. They are stronger than they were before the war.
Where is Russia in all of this? I'm seeing that the CIA director apparently showed up for a 15-minute, powwow in Moscow, and Putin's response to him supposedly, this is all unconfirmed, supposedly was a one-word answer, and then he left, and the CIA director flew back to Maine. What's going on with Russia? Do we know where they're coming down? Obviously, they're allies with Iran, but they're not. They're like China. It's not like they've got guys on the ground fighting or anything. So
there's no ground fighting in Iran, so yes, they don't have people on the ground fighting. But if you talk about launching drones, I guarantee you probably have people from Russia there helping coordinate and teach them how to use drones. And yeah, Russia has a big grudge against the West right now for Ukraine's drone strikes into Russia.
So what is you think the Russian view on the Iran war?
I would really love to know what the hell that was all about. Because you're right, it was I mean, we don't know exactly who it was or what happened, and who knows what those reports were or anything. But if that was true, if any of that was true, boy, there's something afoot there. And
well, Axios did say, the Axios has confirmed that he did fly.
Okay.
That's what the last report.
Yes, the head of CIA went to Russia for a very brief trip. Who knows why?
Official report, but nobody knows what it was about. As far as we know, it was about Dolly Parton's recent death. I mean, we don't know. I will say, Philip Pilkington, who's one of our regular guests, he thinks it was all one big distraction. The Trump administration did it to distract from the.
You mean more theater? That's not possible.
Theater? Trump engaging in theater? Never.
And honestly, since you said that, I think that makes the most sense.
Well, Philip tweeted it this morning, and at first I was like, "Oh, he's having fun." But the more I thought about it, I was like, "Oh,
that actually makes a lot of sense." Well, the other option would be, what did they go there for? I think if there was some realistic discussion to take place that was a short-term discussion, it was basically it would be, and again, just speculating here, it would be to tell Putin, "Hey, look, if the Iranians don't budge, we're going to escalate. So please don't target our troops because we won't like that." That's the only thing that I could really think of.
Another rumor is, and this is what all the OSINT accounts, but I don't trust these OSINT accounts, by the way. But a lot of these OSINT accounts are saying that Ratcliffe was sent there because there's fear in D.C. that Putin's getting ready to do another mass conscription and that he's going to go in for the final kill.
Not going to happen. Russia's recruiting more than enough troops voluntarily, like 250,000 this year so far.
In Ukraine, which is believable considering Ukraine, they're out of air defense interceptors. They're not doing well. It's
but the Russians aren't doing very well either. So it's.
Yeah, but I think they have
Okay. Yeah, he is definitely more on the propagandized sides. Because you look at anything what's going on the ground, Russia's just advancing. And you can tell that things are getting desperate on the Ukrainian side by how much they're begging for a ceasefire on so many different fronts and making wild proposals. Yeah, desperation is on the Ukrainian side.
Endurance, though. I think that the momentum, I think, is in their favor right now because of the depletion rate.
That is putting it lightly.
I mean, the Ukrainians are basically out of Patriots, which is a key weapon for them. They're, so I don't know. It's just odd. And I was just wondering if you had any thought as.
Well, if it's on financial markets, it's Jeff Snyder is definitely better. Talk about like not normal things happening in the Treasury market, for example. He's a good guy. On geopolitics, I take what he says with a grain of salt. Hey, Proton Snail, thanks for the lurk.
Because it could very well be about Iran. I mean, we might have gone there to talk to them about something. I just, I'm wondering what the Russian position is on this with Iran, because it's clearly not ending anytime soon.
No, and I think the Russians have at least considered that Iran is out of the Iran is no longer a reliable partner as far as their aims in Ukraine. Iran's got its own problems, and I think they've come to terms with that, and they've probably adjusted their strategies accordingly.
I don't think Russia depended on Iran for anything. They got the Shahed drone from Iran, but then they set up their own factories, and now all the drones they're using and missiles, everything's coming from within Russia. They never were counting on Iran for anything. Rather, it's more likely that Russia was exporting drones to Iran.
So I don't necessarily think that the U.S. would go over there and say something about Ukraine, Iran, that kind of thing. I think it's really it makes the most sense that this was just another distraction, another things that people can talk about that isn't the main object and the main thing. And the only other thing would be, look, if we don't get what we want in the next little while, this is what we're going to do, and you guys probably shouldn't oppose us in what we're actually going to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Russian position. I mean, obviously they on paper support Iran, but
they've been helping Iran with targeting of U.S. bases. I'm absolutely certain of that.
Is interesting, and the Chinese position is fascinating. How they've, let me ask
these
you,
alliances, Brandon. The
reason Iran is so confident is because it does have the backing of two superpowers, Russia and China. It does have their backing. They're not neutral parties.
They're all mercenary. They're all transactional.
Well, right? That is also, though, the Eurasian. So this is not, this is a Eurasian war party, right?
But they have a common opponent. They might be transactional, but Iran, Russia, and China have an adversary in the form of the United States of America that has taken hostile actions against all three of them. Russia via Ukraine, Iran's been directly attacked, and there's been 2 trade wars already between the United States and China. So when you have a common enemy, you ally.
Right? This isn't like Britain and America in the World War.
Even that's kind of the U.S. allies are also very transactional.
Well, now especially they are. Now especially.
It's not just governments throughout history have been transactional. That's just kind of the way it is. Right. We kind of think that there's a special relationship with the Brits, but let's be honest. As long as
I think there was until very recently.
Sure, I mean, for a while there, sure, but we also had a special relationship with the French in the the late 1700s.
That's right.
It kind of disappeared pretty quickly, and I think that's just the nature of governments and geopolitics. But I think when you look at the Chinese and their relationship with the Iranians, they weren't best buddies. No. They don't really share a whole lot in common, starting with ideology.
They share one big thing in common in that they have a common foe. And that's the most important thing to share in common.
So it was really basically, we have some mutual interests, some connections. So we'll do as much as we can for you as long as it makes sense for us to do it. The same thing with the Russians. We needed your drones, especially earlier in the war, but maybe we don't necessarily need them as much anymore. So, hey, you guys are kind of on your own. We'll help you wherever we can, just because we want to stick it to the Americans as much as possible.
Exactly.
But don't count on us for anything substantial.
Yeah, it's definitely got that sort of transactional feel. But right now, they, specifically Russia and China, are closer than they've ever been.
Well, right now, Iran is winning. Everyone regards it as Iran winning. They have control of Strait of Hormuz. They've hit back hard anytime they've been attacked by Americans. So they don't need any extra help. So this theory has that it's only transactional and that it doesn't come into play. If Iran actually ever got into trouble, would the Chinese and the Russians come bail them out? I'd say yes. I think if Iran needed it, they'd actually be willing to extend a fair amount of help to Iran. China too, though perhaps to a lesser extent. I think I'm going to end this video here. I've covered all the important points. No radically new developments in the situation in Iran. The military action is now very unlikely until after the midterms, especially after this Benson declares economic war against Iran. Yeah, Trump doesn't want to be starting a war in 2 months before the midterms or restarting the war. So at least they'll be calm on that front. All we have to do is just watch what's going on, specifically in diesel, and see if we run into a shortage scenario in the near future. That's what I would expect. I don't think everything is going to be all calm and hunky-dory until the election. I think you're going to see some real problems before then. Sooner rather than later. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch, and I'll see you next video. Bye.